another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello and good evening. This is Don Swans, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 15th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Front page, as usual. Question: where have all the male therapists gone? Psychology is increasingly a female-dominated profession that may have implications for boys and men. It's written by regular contributor Pamela Paul. When Martin Seligman, the best-selling author, professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and one of the most influential figures in the field, became a psychologist in the mid-1960s, the ratio of men to women in the field was 80 to 20. Today, that ratio has flipped. The main consequence of the feminization of psychology is the topics that are worked on, says Seligman. From the 1960s through the 1980s, it was aggression, conflict, and trauma, but not love, meaning, friendship, or cooperation. Then, in the 90s, the prevailing areas of research flipped, becoming less violent and more human, or more humane. Fittingly, for the founder of the field of positive psychology, Seligman sees this as a good thing. But one downside, he says, is there's not as much research now on therapy and issues for boys and men. For decades, the field of Freud and Jung tended to prioritize males and pathologize females. Think hysterical women and refrigerator mothers. But the landscape of mental health, from research psychology to psychiatry, has since skewed, in some cases overwhelmingly, female. In the U.S., men now account for only 18% of social workers and 20% of psychologists, down from 38% and 68% in 1968, respectively, according to the American Institute of Boys and Men, a research and advocacy organization founded in 2023. The lack of male representation in the mental health professions couldn't come at a worse time, says Richard Reeves, founder of AIBM and author of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. American boys are falling behind in school and tumbling into perilous internet rabbit holes. Suicide rates among men ages 25 to 34 are on the rise. Men are trailing women in the workplace. Popular discourse is dominated by phrases like toxic masculinity, the male loneliness epidemic, and male malaise. Both male and female therapists stress the importance of providing positive, pro-social, and professional alternatives to the often noxious influence of the manosphere. But while there's plenty of talk about the problem with men, there is far less conversation around how to help them. The second problem is poised to get even worse. While a field increasingly dominated by women by women, has become more open to studying issues like pregnancy, motherhood, and female sexuality, it may also exert its own biases. Nonetheless, when it came to a deliberate explosion of men's inner lives, how they think, feel, and express themselves, the male psyche is becoming less the norm than an aberration. One of the big problems with the helping professions now is they approach men and boys with a deficit perspective, says Mark Kizleka, former president of the Society for the Psychological Study of Men and Masculinities at the American Psychological Association. They are greatly influenced by models that look at how boys and men are flawed, rather than about how boys and men are different. Though men have historically been therapy avoidant, in recent years more are interested in getting professional help. In 2024, 17.3% of men sought some form of counseling, up from 8.7% in 2002. Mental health professionals are adamant that a skilled clinician can work with both sexes and that a therapist's gender rarely determines the outcome. A large body of research shows that therapeutic alliance, a combination of shared method, communication preferences, and approach, is the strongest indicator for success. That said, some men prefer to open up to other men. According to one of the few studies on the subject, 40% of men have a gender preference in therapists, evenly divided between men and women. The most common reasons they gave for preferring men were feeling more comfortable, 46%, and feeling better understood, 26%. They also felt more empathy from and less judged by male therapists. In interviews, clinicians noted that men who work in male-dominated fields, combat veterans, police officers, firefighters, and other emergency workers, are especially likely to want a therapist either with similar experiences or who speaks the same language. Some men prefer to talk to someone they think will viscerally understand what they're grappling with, whether it's bullying, sexual issues, intrusive thoughts, masculinity, fatherhood, divorce, or job loss. The stuff that's embarrassing, the pornography they're looking at, whether it's heterosexual or homosexual, they don't want to tell a female therapist, says Adam Shakar, a social worker in private practice. They don't want to tell a male therapist either, but they're more willing to share. This may be especially true for young people. There's a commonsensical understanding that it may be easier for teenage boys to talk to male clinicians and girls with female clinicians, says Lisa DeMoore, a clinical psychologist and author of The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. Yet, starting in school, most kids first encounter with the helping professions. The face of mental health is increasingly female. In 2025, only 10% of school counselors were men. As of 2021, only 10% of master's degree recipients who specialized in developmental and child psychology were male. An influx of women into mental health has had the unintended consequence of declining pay and prestige, which only compounds men's tendency to steer clear of the field. But longtime practitioners point to other factors behind the trend. A lot of guys are not drawn to grad school in psychology because they sense they're not wanted there, says psychologist Daniel Ellenberg, past president of the Society for Psychology of Men and Masculinities at the American Psychological Association. If you have women grad students who tell guys to just shut up, you've talked long enough. A 24-year-old guy will be like, "What? I'm responsible for that?" Ellenberg, who has run men's therapy groups in the Bay Area for decades, blames binary thinking in our culture, which tends to see certain roles as strongly gender-coded. Men who want to work with kids, for example, are looked on with suspicion. Guys still learn that being in the healing arts is somehow very feminine. As much as I would love to see this craziness die of what's considered masculine and what's considered feminine, it just doesn't go away. Benji Haydar, who recently got his master's in social work and works as a psychotherapist at a community behavioral health clinic in New York, was surprised not only by the paucity of fellow male students, but also by the extent to which men were overlooked in his coursework. I was very unimpressed with how unseriously men's mental health was taken in classes. Haydar says, men's concerns and needs were generally ignored relative to those of other demographic groups. We are just making it harder for anyone to approach men's mental health in a serious way. Men's and boys' mental health needs often differ from those of females in key ways. According to both researchers and clinicians, broadly speaking, women tend more toward internalizing behaviors like anxiety and depression, while men tend to externalize their problems into addiction, aggression, risk-taking, and anger. They often avoid emotional disclosure and regard vulnerabilities as a sign of weakness, which can make them challenging as patients. A male clinician can reduce the fears of being judged or exposed or misunderstood and lower the threshold for exposure, says Michael Zakalik, a clinical psychologist based in Seattle. It normalizes the experience without necessarily feminizing it. Simply saying an emotionally fluent adult man can, he says, can itself be a therapeutic intervention. In his own practice, Zakalik tries to reframe therapy in ways that men can more easily relate to. A patient might describe a difficult experience and then say, "But I was tough." And I say, "What do you mean by tough?" "I think it's pretty tough coming in here and crying in front of me. That's tough." Offering group therapy, which builds on men's tendency to communicate shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face, is another effective way to get men to open up. Ronald Levant, author of The Problem with Men, Insights on Overcoming a Traumatic Childhood from a world-renowned psychologist, has found men's groups especially useful in engaging men who foot drag their way to therapy. The men come in and are surprised to see so many other men because they have long believed that they're the only ones with this problem and that other guys are fine. They think I'm the only schmuck that feels this bad and never get the corrective feedback that depression is like the common cold of mental illness. Roughly 15% of U.S. men aged 21 to 25 reported experiencing a major depressive episode in 2024. It's estimated that roughly 1 in 5 men suffer from some form of mental illness, a share that has increased from 13% in 2008. More research into these trends could help clinicians better understand how to address them, says Zach Seidler, Global Director of Men's Health Research in Movember in Sydney. But rather than devote resources to researching the underlying issues, we continue to try to diagnose a problem without actually speaking to the men. People in the field often refer to me as a specialist because I focus on men. And I'm like, no, this is 50% of the population, says Seidler. That says everything about where we're at, Seidler, who conducted the study on men's gender preferences in therapists, is often viewed with suspicion by the left as a Trojan horse for the men's rights movement, and by the right as a radical feminist who is somehow emasculating men by wanting to explore their emotional lives. I'm only 10 years out of my PhD, and it only took me a few years to become one of the top 10 experts in the world on the subject, Seidler said. I walked into a very wide open space. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here is an interesting question. Is it rude to leave a party without saying goodbye? It's a question that comes up often in my work as an etiquette coach. This article is written by Allison Chipperdak, who is the founder of Etiquette Coaching and the firm Elevate Etiquette, and author of Was It Something I Said? Everyday Etiquette to Avoid Awkward Moments in Relationships, Work, and Life. It's a question that comes up often in my work as an etiquette coach, as I said. In an era when younger people are often criticized for ghosting in friendships, dating, and work, disappearing without explanation is widely frowned upon. But for some social situations, quietly slipping out the door may not be bad manners at all. In America, the maneuver is known as an Irish exit or an Irish goodbye. But it exists under different names in other cultures too. In England, it's the French leave. In France, a filer anglais. In German, it's attributed to the Polish. In slang, it's ghosting, or merely ducking out. Some call it unthinkable, others efficient. Is it actually good etiquette? The truth is most Irish people had never heard the term Irish exit until recently, says Dr. Kelly Fitzgerald at the School of Irish, Celtic Studies and Folklore at the University College at Dublin. She can see its roots, though. Traditionally, Irish culture values goodbye that are warm, friendly, and sincere. What many call craik, the lively spirit of social connection, can make gatherings feel relaxed and informal, rather than ceremonial, and grand goodbyes can feel unnecessary, if not slightly uncomfortable. But sometimes that friendly farewell can unravel into a 30-minute chat. If time doesn't allow for this, Fitzgerald says, it is often considered better to slip away than to appear rushed or insincere in a curt goodbye. This is what Irish Americans have dubbed the Irish exit. Hugh Farron, owner of Farron's Bar, a roughly 200-year-old establishment in Ireland, sees it as a practical move. On Saturday nights, when social pressure to stay out can be strongest, it's easier to slip away without triggering the inevitable round, don't go yet. But he also notes that today's younger generation drinks less than its predecessors. As a result, nights out tend to wind down earlier, and the need for a stealthy exit arises less often. So is the Irish exit rude or simply a strategic social maneuver? Like most things in etiquette, it depends. At a packed wedding reception, where a couple is making the rounds and guests are caught up in the moment, slipping out unnoticed isn't just acceptable. It might be the most polite option. It spares the host from managing a revolving door of goodbyes, avoids disrupting the natural energy of the event, and doesn't encourage others to leave simply because they see you heading out. But an intimate dinner party where your presence is meaningful, disappearing without a word can feel dismissive, even cold. In a professional setting like networking, event, or gala, a graceful departure signals respect. Whether it's a quick, wonderful to see you, or a subtle wave to the host. The key to pulling it off? Read the room. If your absence won't be noticed until morning, you're in the clear. If leaving without a goodbye could cause confusion or concern, a discreet farewell, whether whispered to the host or sent via text strikes the perfect balance between traditional and modern convenience. Would Emily Post approve? Before you picture Emily Post clutching her pearls at the thought of sneaking out without a proper goodbye, know that etiquette isn't about rigidity. It's all about context. A well-executed Irish exit isn't about disappearing. It's about knowing when a grand goodbye is unnecessary. A quick follow-up text. Love seeing you. Thanks for a wonderful night. Can bridge the gap between traditional etiquette and modern convenience. Again, changing direction as we listen to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we find this question presented. War is hell, but is it good for the economy? Written by Daniel Michaels and Tom Fairless. War is a tragedy costing lives and livelihoods. But can it also be good for an economy? That question might seem cold-hearted. But as fuel prices soar and shipping bottlenecks create shortages in the near term, the long view shows something more positive. Military spending can create jobs, start new technologies, and spur investment. Around the world, more countries are ramping up arms production and boosting investments in national security, if only to deter rivals. These outlays promise to scramble government spending priorities and weigh on deficits and credit ratings. The swing started 4 years ago, when Russian President Vladimir Putin bounced back from his humiliating failure to immediately conquer Ukraine by putting his country's economy on a military footing. Today, Russia spends more than 17% of official gross domestic product on its military, avoiding an economic freefall under the pressure of sanctions and war costs, analysts say. Russia's reorientation is extreme, but Moscow is not alone. From Washington and Ottawa to Europe and Japan, money is flowing into the apparatus of war and security on levels not seen in decades. Now, the consequences of war, shortages and inflation, loom for business and consumers globally. To paraphrase Milton Friedman, we're all wartime economies now. Is that inherently bad? For Ukraine, Lebanon, Gaza, and large parts of Russia, the result of conflict is horrific tallies of death, injury, and loss. Iran now faces a painful recovery, whatever comes next, in a country already struggling under violent repression with an economic collapse. Further from the battlefield, though, the picture is less lopsided, particularly in Europe. For decades, the continent minimized defensive outlays, opting instead to fund having social welfare programs, and expensive public works. La Dolce Vita after the Cold War was sweet for some. But economic growth also slowed sharply in Europe as military spending declined. From 2 to 3% GDP growth in the 1980s and 90s to around 1% in recent years. Growth held up better in the U.S., which continued to spend heavily on the military, and where defense money often supports technology and technological innovation in cutting-edge areas such as artificial intelligence. Now, European members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization have pledged to spend 5% of gross domestic product on arms and security. That will require painful cuts in other spending, such as public health care, welfare, and culture. But some economists see a silver lining, at least for business and jobs. Europe's economy is languishing, and its once vibrant car industry is getting battered by Chinese competition. Military production can create jobs for laid-off auto workers and employ engineers who might otherwise design vehicles. If all that spending helps deter Russia from attacking Europe, it can be considered well spent. NATO won the Cold War without firing a shot in anger. That cost a vast sum over decades and left arsenals of tanks, chemical weapons, and nuclear arms that later had to be destroyed, again at a great cost. But along the way, it also yielded jumbo jets, the internet, space exploration, and satellite navigation, not to mention better lives for millions of people once subjugated by the Soviet Union. I'm fairly convinced there will be long-run positive growth effects from higher defense spending, said Guntram Wolf, economics professor at the Free University of Brussels. New investments in research and training could equip the next generation of entrepreneurs to create consumer products, such as drone-based motorcycles, Wolf said. We are already seeing it. New firms are emerging, he said, pointing to new centers of tech excellence around Munich, Paris, and the Nordic region. The downsides of military spending are well known. It can cause scarcity for consumers and inflation as raw materials become weapons, not toys or dishwashers. It crowds out potentially more productive investment as governments borrow more in financial markets to fund the additional spending, pushing up interest rates for households and businesses. If the defense sector seeks to lure workers out of high-tech sections or manufacturing, wages rise. Military hardware also tends to sit on a shelf or explode, meaning it can't be used productively like a machine or a bridge. But there are also economic upsides. The U.S., for example, emerged from both world wars richer, the second time entering combat amid the Great Depression and exiting as a superpower. U.S. unemployment fell from 14.6% in 1940 to 1.2% in 1944. By 1945, the U.S. produced roughly half of the world's GDP. Military research often leads to private sector spin-offs, from industrial-scale steel production and computers to reconstructive surgery. Defense contracts are now helping finance AI, quantum computing, and drone technologies, all with big potential across the civilian economy. South Korea, which exists under the constant threat of war, has built a booming arms export sector that provides a second engine of growth alongside microchip exports. Israel has posted record investment in its tech sector recently, driven partly by military spending. President Trump wants a defense budget of $1.5 trillion, or about 6% of GDP, roughly comparable to the height of Reagan's Cold War spending barrage in 1985. Restocking American arsenals after the war on Iran can keep factories across the country busy for years. China's shipyards, meanwhile, are building the world's largest navy while spinning out commercial ships. Its vast merchant fleet and logistics industry play dual roles supporting the People's Liberation Army's ability to mobilize and carry domestic factory production to shoppers worldwide. For China's economy, it's all good. If history has a clear message about the economic impact of military spending, it is unpredictability. The U.S. boomed in the 1960s, but soon stagflation taught a lesson in the risks of waging a war in Vietnam while running the domestic economy full tilt. The Soviet Union appeared mightily until its grossly inefficient spending on arms and domestic terror proved unsupportable. Similar lessons run far back in history. The French Revolution was sparked in part by the high cost of supporting American rebels against England. King Louis XVI deprived his European rival of its colonial jewel, but lost his kingdom and his head. The winner from this spending was the U.S. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The aneurysm that led me to romance. It's written by C.J. Farley, who is a former Wall Street Journal editor and the author of Who Knows You by Heart. When my wife suffered a brain injury, she became hooked on romance novels. After getting past my distaste for the genre, at last I understood why. 10 years ago, I found myself running beside my wife, Sharon, as she was gurneyed into an operating room in Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx. As the OR doors closed, a nurse handed me a plastic bag containing my wife's wedding ring. It felt like the end of a love story. But a plot twist was coming. During a fitness class, an artery in my wife's head had ruptured, spurting blood across the left frontal lobe of her brain. She made it through surgery, but afterwards she could barely talk, walk, or concentrate. As she struggled to recover, doctors ordered her to stay off her electronic devices. No work iPhone, no personal iPhone, no iPad, no laptop. One thing she could do was read books. Before her aneurysm, Sharon didn't make time for fiction. As a TV correspondent, she kept her focus on nonfiction books about personal finance. Post-surgery, she began to devour several novels a week, but only about romance. My wife's new reading habits left me with questions. What was I going to do with that? She had to look for romance between book covers. She laughed and made it clear that it wasn't about our relationship. It was about her recovery. She also had a request. Could I find her the best romance books to read? There was only one problem. I hated romance books. I'm not alone in my resistance to the genre. Despite commercial success, romance suffers from a lack of critical respect, especially among men. Mark Twain reportedly once quipped that any library is a good library that does not contain a volume by Jane Austen, even if it contains no other book. Still, I started visiting romance websites and bricks and mortar bookstores to buy the best titles. Coming back from a brain trauma can be a lonely journey, and finding books for my wife became a way that I could walk beside her on the road to recovery. I'm a novelist and a journalist, so Sharon trusted my taste in writing. I gradually, maybe grudgingly, began to see the appeal of romantic fiction. Driven by the success of TV shows like Rachel Reed's Heated Rivalry, based on a book series about hockey players in love, and books that mash up sex and fantasy, such as Rebecca Yarrow's Fourth Wing. Romance books are winning new readers through online fan communities like Book Talk. Sharon also loved the fact that romance fiction is so international. One of her recent favorites is An Academic Affair, a novel about two professors in Tasmania. And she relished that romances are often multicultural. Amanda Elliott's Hanukkah romance, Love You a Latke, hooked her from the title alone. Literary authors often declare that they write first and foremost for themselves. I don't think that an artist should bother about his audience. Vladimir Nabokov sniffed. But top romance writers like Jasmine Guillory, A.B. Jimenez, Helen Hoang, and Nicholas Sparks work hard to deliver exactly what their fans want, regularly turning breakout individual books into ongoing franchises and readers into repeat customers. My wife has read them all. I eventually concluded that some literary authors hate love stories, not because writing about the topic is too easy, but because it's so hard. I love you can be the 3 most difficult words for some dudes to say. Imagine how challenging it is to write 100,000 more words on the subject. But romance books have a serious purpose that can help us sort through what we value in others and in ourselves. A book series like Jenny Hen's The Summer I Turned Pretty spurs readers to root for the protagonist, to pick the boyfriend that best represents her outlook on life. Are you Team Conrad, parentheses, passion, close parentheses, or Team Jeremiah, parentheses, stability, close parentheses? Romances often encourage readers to make brave choices, and maybe that's why they seem to help my wife on her recovery. As Jojo Moyes writes in Me Before You, live boldly, push yourself, don't settle. At a time when creativity is increasingly outsourced to artificial intelligence, emotion is one thing humans can still call our own, which is why we should treasure love stories and laugh away people who call them useless or silly. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote that the highest form of love is to be the protector of another person's solitude. It's a joy to give the people we love the space to be themselves, unmeditated by algorithms. Sharon tells me she made a conscious decision to read romantic fiction after experiencing trauma. She didn't want to read more about more trauma. She wanted healing and happy endings. My wife went through months of rehab, honing her focus, regaining her balance, and eventually returning full-time to her career. She has made it a yearly tradition to gather friends and family to join her in a 5K race to raise money for the Brain Aneurysm Foundation. And yes, I still find her the latest romance books. Sharon calls herself a brain aneurysm survivor, and rightfully so. But she knows happy endings in the real world aren't as simple as they are in books. After an aneurysm, your former life, free from the threat of death, of brain damage, of another aneurysm, is gone and buried. But you might find new life in everyday experiences others take for granted, like walking, talking, laughing, or reading about romance. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Review on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. I don't know how many women are in the audience, but I'm going to read this next article anyway. It's entitled Hormones Explain Why Women Feel Pain Longer. It's written by Helen Woodward. I'm going to read it because I'm interested in it and would like to discuss it with my wife. New research probed why men generally recover faster from aches and pains. Pain lasts longer for women than it does for men, partly because of differences in testosterone levels. A recent study suggests. Research has long indicated that men generally recover faster from pain and are less likely than women to develop chronic pain. Now scientists have a better idea why. When you get injured, your immune system sends certain white blood cells to calm pain-sensing neurons and inflammation. In men, these white blood cells are more likely to produce a pain-resolving molecule that can quickly quell the ache, according to a recent study in the journal Science Immunology. The testosterone hormone is probably what drives the increased production of that pain-resolving molecule, known as interleukin-10, the researchers found. It's not because women are too emotional or too soft, and the pain is just in their head, said Geoffrey Lement, a neuroimmunologist at Michigan State University and study co-author. Researchers examined data from 172 women and 73 men who had gone to emergency rooms across the U.S. between 2017 and 2021 after experiencing traumatic injuries, mostly from car accidents. The patient rated their pain right after their injuries, then again at 8 weeks and 12 weeks. The men reported their pain went away more quickly. Blood tests reveal the men had more interleukin-10 than the women did. In the lab, Lamet's team found male mice recovered more quickly from pain after an injury than female mice. In the male's blood had higher levels of interleukin-10. They honed in on testosterone by experimenting with sex hormone changes in the animals. The group removed the ovaries of some of the female mice and implanted pellets containing a hormone derived from testosterone. These mice had higher interleukin levels and recovered more quickly from pain than female mice who didn't receive the procedure. After one quarter of U.S. adults have chronic pain, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, with 8.5% of Americans experiencing levels that restrict their ability to work or disrupt their daily lives. Existing treatments can have negative side effects and don't always resolve symptoms. Many treatment approaches involve trying to stop what is causing the pain. But just as important is understanding what pain or what makes pain go away. According to Ann Grigas, a Virginia Tech neuroscientist who was not involved in the recent study. If we have something that can kind of cut that pain signal, the interleukin-10 molecule, it's a potential therapeutic avenue, Grigas said. Testosterone patches in the right dose applied to the skin might help, Lamette said. There's a picture on the back page of Dr. Barbara Sturm, a very attractive woman. As she says, "You're doing way too much with your skin. People are so rough," said the German skincare brand founder. "Let's resurface, let's do laser. Let's do acid peels, let's do retinol. Every time you do these things, you break through your skin barrier and make your skin so vulnerable." She doesn't like to use the word longevity when she talks about her products. But anyway, it's an interesting read. I find it that she is very much anti-retinol, and that she is very much pro-natural sunlight. She's asked the question specifically, is there a product or an ingredient you don't think people should use? And her answer is simply retinol. People use it as an anti-aging ingredient, but retinol strips down your microbiome, causes inflammation, and makes your skin thinner. If you use a retinol, you shouldn't be in daylight, on a computer, or in pollution. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 15th issue of the Wall Street Journal Review. We read from the Wall Street Journal Review every Thursday at 7 p.m. And your reader this evening has been Don Swans. And I want to thank you very much for listening. I mean that. Thank you. Thank you sincerely. And hopefully we'll be together next week. Same time, same place. On the dial of the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the New York Times. At 9 o'clock is Fortune Magazine. And at 10 o'clock, we have episode number 9 of The Secret of Secrets by Dan Brown. Stay with us for these readings and more. If you or people you know shop at any of the Dash's supermarkets, please save Dash's register tapes for radio reading. Our agency receives $2 for every $100 in Dash's register tapes. Radio reading has raised thousands of dollars so far. Anyone can drop off their Dash's tapes to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, between William and Clinton Streets. Or Dash's tapes can be mailed to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 1199 Harlem Road, Cheektowaga, New York, 142. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which